And I remember one day coming all the way down and I just felt my right pec turn into what felt like bubble gum. And I knew straight away. I was actually able to get the bar back off my chest, which don't know how I did that. But I certainly didn't detach it, but I tore it pretty bad. Alphas, welcome back to the show. My name is Andy Naylor, CEO and founder of Naylor Body Design and host of your Optimal Alpha podcast. Welcome back to the show. We've got a versus again. It's been a while since we've done one of these, so these are always quite interesting because we're going to delve into a topic of one thing versus another with no particular slant on which one might be better. Really, my only goal through these episodes is to just give you thoughts and ideas so that you can then apply them in your own world, your own setting with your own goals and come to your own conclusions. So we're going to do a cool one today. This is a real bro one, I would say. And this is bench press versus dumbbell press, which on the face of it seem very, very similar. But for any of you who've been training any degree of time and have done both, you know that there are quite a lot of differences. So we're going to delve into these two as a versus, the positives and the negatives of each. This is not an exhaustive list. It's just the things that came to mind before I pressed record. Let's go bench press first. Something I will say right off the bat. Still, even in this day and age, and certainly with our client base, which is mostly busy men, busy business leader type men from the States, bench press is still a real favorite move. It's still a move that culturally in the gym seems to be one of those moves that people really want to do. And it still carries weight. No pun intended. It still carries weight, I would say, with ego. I'm not saying people are ego lifting, but there still is I can bench something, or I want to bench my own body weight or what. So there is definitely still something attached to that. I'm not saying that's a negative thing, but it is something to consider. A movement to me is just a movement to achieve an end goal. I've never been one for chasing how much of something I can lift. I'm always looking to improve numbers, lift more over time, but I haven't really ever personally had I need to bench 3 plates, whatever. I just personally don't see it that way. If somebody does see it that way, that's absolutely fine because it is just a goal. However, I tend to look at certainly these verses and I try to frame them with an idea of I'm looking at it from multiple angles. So muscular development, what people have available to them, training on their own, activation of muscle safety, like a whole bunch of stuff. So I'm trying to give it all those angles. Anyhow, bench press, the positives. Well, every gym has a bench press. Every gym since the age of gyms has had a bench with a bar sort of, situated above it where you can put weights on it. So every gym, probably even a home gym, every gym I would say has some sort of bench press setup. Could even be a Smith press. That's a whole different versus, but ultimately every gym is going to have some sort of bench press, at least a flat one and probably an incline one as well. They're easy to set up, aren't they? The bench is already there, the bar's there. It's just a case of putting the same weight on either side. I'd say that's probably one thing to consider. Lay down and off you go. So it's fairly easy to sort of set the thing up. It's also easy to get into position. What I mean by that is getting to your first rep. You get under the bar. The bar is already up in the air, isn't it? Because you're going to just lift it that last little bit off the stand that it's sitting on. So it's actually in a really good position to start the movement. You haven't got to start it from off your chest. You haven't really got to lift it up into place. It's already there above you in about the perfect place. You just push it, an inch or two off the rack and off you go. So it's easy to sort of get yourself into that first rep. I would also suggest over the two options that I'm giving you, so bench press and dumbbell press, bench press is where you would probably be stronger. Now, if we think about it, think of powerlifting style training and powerlifting competitions. They don't do it with dumbbells, do they? They do it with a barbell. Now, there are probably loads of different reasons for that, but I would suggest one of them is most people are going to end up being able to lift more weight with a bar. Why might that be? Well, without diving too far into it, I would say it's a lot to do with stability and the fact that there is a closed loop between you and the bar. So if you think about dumbbells, you've really got to concentrate on where each hand is going. That's a thing called proprioception. That's a good thing, actually. Certainly improving proprioception. But I would say with a bar, one, there may be a slightly less range that you can actually go, because again, if we're thinking of powerlifting, we know that people tend to arch their back so that they're moving the bar the least amount possible. That's again a completely different thing. I'm not really into powerlifting myself, but just as a personal choice, but probably because I'm just not strong enough to be anywhere near decent at it. So it was never an avenue that I went down. But I would suggest that most people are going to be stronger. I would also say as a positive, it's far easier for a spotter. I don't know how, there's normally a stand, isn't there? There's normally something that someone can stand on, like a little platform behind most decent bench presses where someone can stand on and they can spot directly onto the bar. Now, there are some times where we definitely want to be spotting the machinery, and then there are some times where we want to be touching the person. That is another versus itself. But it's easier for a spotter to be there and really sort of get over the weight. So it's safe for the spotter to get over the weight and be able to sort of pull it up, in that last sort of rep. And another interesting one is actually with a barbell, it's easy to add things like chains. Okay, so, and I've done this. So why on earth would we want to add chains when we can just add weight? Well, without getting too technical, if you were to imagine holding a bar up in the air, say there's no weight on it, so there's now just some chains hanging off it. And when you lift it up, all of the chains are off the floor. So in other words, it weighs as much as it can do, which is, I would suggest, at the top of the movement, which is where all of your sort of joints are starting to align, which is where you're getting strongest. But as you bring the bar down towards your chest, the chains hit the floor and start to ravel, or just start to sort of move into a heap on the floor. But so the bar is the weight to you is technically getting lighter because the chains are starting to lay on the floor, which means as you get to the bottom of the movement, which I would say for bench press is the most dangerous part, the bottom, the stretched part of a bench press, technically it's lighter. Now, this is a really smart way to play with something called resistance profiles and strength curves. Just know that you can adapt the resistance profile of a bench press far easier than you can with dumbbells. So there's a lot of positives there. Now, negatives. The bench press. This is where most people are going to have torn their pec if they've torn their pec. And I've seen some horrific thing. You could easily go and search online. I don't suggest you do this because it will stop you wanting to press anything ever again in your life. But you could easily go online, go onto YouTube, and look at this stuff. And it's normally in a bench press when people tear their pec. Could also be a fly. Basically, someone's going to tear something when it's fully stretched. People aren't really going to tear a muscle. I'm not saying it's not possible, but the likelihood is less of tearing a muscle, really pulling it and tearing it, and maybe in worst case, even detaching part of that muscle from a bone. That's going to happen in the most stretched part. And this is where I think the bench press has its biggest negative, is that when you're at the very, very bottom, just given the way that some people's shoulder mobility works, and also the fact that you are in a fixed loop, again, arms, elbows, shoulders are all sort of fixed to a certain degree because you're holding onto a bar that's causing this sort of fixed loop. And so I know personally, funny enough, I was using chains and I was flat bench pressing. I've been training quite a while. And so I was using chains specifically to try and not have this problem. So when I was down at the lowest part, it was getting lighter. And I remember one day coming all the way down and I just felt my right pec turn into what felt like bubble gum. And I knew straight away. I was actually able to get the bar back off my chest, which I don't know how I did that. But I certainly didn't detach it, but I tore it pretty bad. And it was under a bench press. I couldn't lift my arm up. I went black and blue. I think I couldn't even do a press up. I couldn't hold my own weight, in a plank position. I really hurt my right pec. I did all sorts of recovery, and literally 6 months later was starting to get back into doing the same thing, and exactly the same thing happened. Exactly. And It's not like I was doing anything particularly wrong. It's just for me, that movement does not fit when I'm really pushing and trying to get stronger. So I think this is the biggest drawback for bench press. If you're going to hurt yourself, it's going to be in the bench press. So I think there's also a reasonably restricted movement and path of the bar due to this closed loop. You can only really come down so far. And then it starts to become, well, first of all, dangerous. And I think a little bit less pec activation than the opposite here, which would be the dumbbell press. Also, the bench press just really doesn't fit some people's shoulder mobility. I think that's just a given. In the same way that a squat just doesn't fit mechanically for some people. Given all the options that we have in terms of machinery, there's so many options where it's so much safer. I think in terms of just shoulder health, the bench press is would be really low on my list of things to give someone. I think it can certainly restrict the depth of the rep safely, therefore hindering a safe, stretched portion of the rep, therefore probably less actual growth. It's really hard to push to failure. If you've ever done a bench press and you've got to that, you've pushed the bar up and you think, I think I've got one more. And you go down, and on the way down, you realize you ain't coming back up again. That's it. You're stuck under the bar. That's happened to me a number of times. It's probably happened to lots of people. You can find failure, and if you're going to get to it, you're going to get stuck under the bar. Okay. So it's not really hard to push. And I mean, really push your training on your own. A bench press is something where if you're really going to push, you need someone there with you. Personally, I just don't think it's the best choice for most people for true pec activation and muscle growth. For some people, it's going to be amazing. I think for most people, there are better options. And then it's also super, super dangerous as a decline movement. If you've got someone with you, I think it can be an excellent movement for decline. However, if you're on your own, it's literally possibly one of the most dangerous things you can do in a gym, because if you lose yourself and that bar comes down, it's not just going to rest on your chest, it's basically going to choke you. So sorry to end on that note, but I do think it has a lot of dangers to it.
Alphas, I interrupt this show with a simple message. This show is here to benefit you and your progression to the best version of yourself, but not only just you. It's also here to benefit the people around you, your loved ones, your friends, other alphas in your vicinity. So why not do a really cool thing today? Something that I would thank you for, and maybe someone else would. Share this podcast with at least one other alpha out there who you know would benefit from it. Why not share the information, share the ability for someone else to grow? I'm sure they would thank you. I 100% would absolutely thank you. This podcast only grows by our listeners, our followers doing amazing things like giving us 5-star reviews, downloading podcasts, subscribing, and then of course sharing it with other people. I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Share it with one person, and of course drop us a 5-star review, download the podcast, and of course subscribe. And now back to the show.
Now let's look at the opposite. Dumbbell press. For all intents and purposes, very similar. We're still pressing something away from us. Positives. Again, every gym has them because they're just dumbbells. Most people probably use heavier than they would probably need. So I would suggest that most gyms have plenty enough weight for most people to be cracking on with. Easy to set up in a sense that you have just got to get some dumbbells and a bench and either have the bench flat or either have the bench inclined. So that part of the setup is easy. Okay, I'm going to come to the sort of getting into the first rep in a second. But again, it's easy to set up. What I mean by this is you can get into I can think of a chest machine in Benoist where I train, where you can adjust the seat height, you can adjust the depth of the seat rest behind you, the angle of the seat rest, where the handles are, how far the handles come back. There's so much ability to adjust the equipment, which if you know how you're adjusting it and maybe even make a note of the numbers that you're adjusting it to, you can make it fit you literally perfectly. But also for someone just going into a gym wanting to crack on and get training, that's an absolute minefield. So I think just getting under, a set of dumbbells is obviously easy to set up. I also believe it's a far more natural path of movement. What I mean by this is each shoulder just might be slightly different. You might have one arm slightly longer than the other. Eventually, these little things can make a bit of a difference. And of course, when you've got something independent in both hands, things are going to move just that little bit more naturally. And sometimes if maybe right shoulder just needs to be just tucked down just that little bit further to take away from some shoulder pain, or just to feel that pec a little bit more rather than the front delt, well, then you can do that if you've got dumbbells. So I think the path is way more natural. You can obviously go right to failure. Again, because of the style of movement, I would suggest you need to be careful, but you can go all the way to failure because when you get there, you can just drop the dumbbells to either side. Now, that can be dangerous. One, for people stood next to you. Two, I've seen people drop them on their phones right next to them, so you need to be careful of any equipment around you. But ultimately, getting out of the movement is much easier. I'm not saying throw dumbbells down, no, but you can certainly rep to the point where you're doing very safe partials, and then when you get to a point where you can't get rid of them, you can just get rid of the dumbbells to the side. There is a knack to it, but without going into that, you can get rid of the dumbbells. You can get out of the movement far easier at the bottom of the range than you can under a barbell. In my opinion, out of these two options, I would say the dumbbell press is a far better movement for pec activation and pec growth because you can manipulate it that little bit more. Go a little bit closer to failure, move things around just a little bit so that it works for you rather than being stuck under a bar. So quite a lot of positives there. Negatives. So I would say really, one, you may not be as strong in this position. So if strength is the goal, then potentially a mixture between the two. If muscular activation and muscle growth, so a bigger, better chest, I would say the dumbbell press, as you're probably guessing, I would believe is a better choice. Now, the problem is, though, as you get stronger, it gets harder to get into position for the first rep. Now, what I mean by that is the best example I can give you is I really liked decline, right? In terms of pressing with dumbbells, incline pressing I was rubbish at, which probably means, guess what? Should have done that more. But I was really quite strong, and I really felt, for me, ever so slight decline press. Now, and I would get to maybe 45 kilo dumbbells, which isn't really a huge amount, but there's still two 45 kilo dumbbells that I've got to pick up. I've got to then swing my leg onto a bench without falling over to start with the dumbbells sort of now like being swung up onto my knees. So I'm now sitting on a bench with my legs under the sort of like pad where my lower leg is going to be, my shin is going to be, with the dumbbells on my knees. Now, given that you're getting weaker each time that you do a set, that is getting harder and harder and harder. And that's when you're going to hurt yourself. I don't think doing a dumbbell bench press, actually going through the movement is not where you're at most risk. It's actually getting into position. So let's think of an incline. Most people are going to sit on the bench with the dumbbells on their knees. They're going to lift their knee up to jolt up. You're going to go from a point of having your hand and your elbow in front of you with no weight really going through it. And you've got to then externally rotate your shoulder so your elbow is out to the side to get you in position for the first rep. Now, you've got to do that with both at the same time, haven't you? You've got to go up and both out at the same time. And if you're going to hurt yourself, that's when you're going to do it. That's when it's going to happen. It's not going to happen while you're repping, I don't believe. Yes, possible, but it's more than likely getting in and out of the movement where you're going to hurt yourself. And I've seen people, drop dumbbells, have them sort of cave in on themselves. So there's a degree of sort of danger there. But that then just means you've got to be mindful of how much you're trying to lift and, what it is that you're trying to achieve by doing your dumbbell pressing. So my personal opinion is, it's easy. We could sit here and say, well, barbell pressing clearly worked for Arnold. Yeah, and it'll work for many people. I would think if, someone like Arnold or back in the classic era, they had the amazing equipment that we have available to us now, oh my goodness, they would be using it. Because the equipment and the way, not all equipment, but the most equipment and the way that it is made now is so smart. Both the examples I've just given you are a free weight example. And then we could go back to the debate of free weights or machines, which I've already covered in one of these earlier in the podcast. You can go back and listen to that. Free weights are only ever trying to do one thing, get to the floor. They're trying to go straight down, just straight down. Whereas we could use, and we can't, again, without using things like chains, we can't really change the sort of resistance profile. So as we're, say, getting to the bottom of a movement, the thing still weighs exactly the same as at the top. Whereas we could find chest-based machinery that is adapting for that. Meaning we can push further, we can push harder. We're not having to bounce out of a movement. We're not having to use momentum and inertia in a movement. We can be way more controlled and way more purposeful about what we're actually doing. So, but out of the two, personally, for my opinion, dumbbells would win every time. Now, I would say that because I've nearly torn my pec off my humerus twice. So there's no way I would ever get under a bar and press a barbell ever again. But then also, I think, anecdotally, it's been a long time since I've really coached clients myself. We now have a very successful business coaching thousands of clients all around the world. And bench press is not something that features very heavily in what we do, which for clients coming in, certainly from the States, it's one of the first things they expect that they're going to see because they love it. And I get that. And then we would turn around and say, well, what's the goal? And they would say, well, I'd like to be able to train for the next 20 years. And I don't really, I've already got some battered shoulders and I would like a better chest. And we're like, right, well, then you literally do it. In our opinion, and this is before we've seen you do it, we would straight away say that, it's not the best option. Out of bench press, dumbbells is going to be the better option for so many different reasons. But then outside of that, I would say machinery probably trumps that. So there are my thoughts on the age-old question of bench press versus dumbbells. I would say for me personally, dumbbell press comes out the best. I would love to know your thoughts. So by all means, comment wherever you see this video. Let me know what you think. Let me know your input because I'm always interested to hear. Again, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this, give us a follow. Share with somebody else. So if you know someone who maybe loves the bench press or loves the dumbbell press and maybe you have a bit of a conversation with them thinking that they should be doing the other one, I don't know, maybe give them this as a little bit of information that may help your case. For now, over and out, Alphas. I'll see you on the next episode.